Is Starfield better than Red Dead Redemption 2? In my opinion, no. Is Starfield one of the best games to come out in the last 10 years?
Hey, I heard you had Dunlop's disease.
What? No, I don't have Dunlop's disease. What is that?
Your belly Dunlop over your belt.
Hell yeah. I am once again throwing myself to the wolves. Starfield was in development for 7 years, which was the longest any original Bethesda title cooked in the oven. While previous Bethesda IPs had around 100,000 lines of recorded dialogue, Starfield has over 150,000, all done by 300 different voice actors. Starfield had the biggest plans, the biggest script, and the biggest team working on it. So why is Starfield such a controversial subject in the community? Well, one, it's a Bethesda game, and I don't mean that as a new Bethesda game means it has bugs. I mean it as it's a new Bethesda game, so everybody will hate it no matter what. When Oblivion released almost 2 decades ago, online forums would get heated about how Oblivion simplified the formula and Morrowind was perfect because they just had to go mainstream and simplify the formula for normies. Then in 2011, they did the same thing with Skyrim, because Skyrim's leveling system was even less complex than Oblivion's. Oblivion God, Skyrim Antichrist. When Fallout 4 came out, once again, it happened. The exact same reception, with people furious at the way Bethesda made the game. Fallout New Vegas, God. Fallout 4, Antichrist. And now here we are, 2024. Starfield is the Antichrist, Skyrim is God, and while I'm not denying Skyrim's divine purpose in this milk-drinking world, Starfield sure as hell isn't the first sign of the rapture. But that's just my opinion. Starfield is a different kind of Bethesda game, because while Skyrim is a variety of races, and Fallout has all sorts of mutated species, Starfield is a space society ran by humans and robots. Any form of media using space as the setting usually, if not always, has a variety of alien species living in the universe. Star Wars is probably the best example of this, with humans and robots being only one of the many different kinds of habitants in the movies, books, and games. Also, in Bethesda games, you used to be able to loot anything off of anybody. In Starfield, you can't even take people's clothes off, making the game more safe and PG than anything the company had done before. While I'll expand on those points later and explain why I don't actually think any of those are bad for what Starfield is, I will cover some of the actual problems Starfield has or had. At launch, some of the missions just straight up wouldn't work. I remember really early on in my first playthrough, I finished a mission, but the game wouldn't register that I had done it, so I couldn't progress in the story without using a console command, and if you guys don't know, that disables achievements. As a disgusting, greasy, Reddit-using Hagraven though, achievements are one of the main reasons I stick with video games. Also, Starfield uses this weird fuel system when fast traveling between universes. It was most likely part of a scrapped fuel mechanic, but what it does now is just make your journey tedious, where instead of looking like this to travel, it looks like this. Right now, Starfield has a mixed reception on Steam, a 6.9 user rating on Metacritic, an average of 6,400 players per month, and the Vatican has deemed it blasphemy to allow any Starfield player near the church. Did you know in 2022, a band performed Undertale's Megalovania for the Pope? Sorry, we were just on the subject of the Vatican. But anyways, in this video, I want to explain why I believe Starfield is an excellent space fantasy role-playing game, and why you need to give it a shot. Bethesda games are known for being replayable. Video games are great, but it sucks when you finish a really good one and you can't pick it up again because it really only works if you play it once. Starfield is super replayable for a variety of reasons that I'll be breaking down in this video, but one of the reasons is the open-ended design of missions. It's rare in Starfield that there will be one dialogue option to choose from, and in a lot of cases, if you say one option, a different one will open up, making the interaction more deep. For example, I questioned this guy on if I can trust him or not, and the game gave me the option to persuade him to tell me his name, and I didn't have that option before I questioned him. In Skyrim, which is already an open-ended game, this kind of depth in conversation wasn't available, and it's stuff like this that makes me excited to actually interact with the NPCs. Because persuasion and using words instead of guns is such a big game mechanic in Starfield, you can play as a pacifist as much as you want. And while playing as a pacifist in Skyrim may not have any benefit, in Starfield it does, because the people around you will actually be affected by your actions. Followers in Bethesda games serve the purpose to follow you and help you on your journey, whether it's to carry some of your belongings or help you paint the walls with your enemies. In Skyrim, they did just that and only that. They were more dogs than people, but in Starfield, they have their own feelings towards your actions. Depending on what you do, they will even hate you and not talk to you unless you apologize and make it right for them. Some of them have unique missions that can only be unlocked by increasing your bond with them. I remember something that blew my mind for the first time playing the game was how followers will even say something about the environment around them, making them feel like an actual part of the world opposed to your personal robot.
Urban didn't live here for long, but he certainly had a lot of junk here.
I've seen the argument before that Morrowind was made 20 years prior, it had a way smaller team, and had way more missions than Starfield. Starfield has a little over 100 missions in the entire game, while Morrowind has around 480. A lot of people look at this number and think, wow, Bethesda really fell off, look at those numbers, but here is something major to consider. Morrowind had no animations for extended dialogue, and all of the dialogue in the game is done in the form of text. So making missions even back then would have been way easier than it is today. Starfield is fully voice acted. It has multiple dialogue choices, alternate ways to execute quests, and has a lot of unique animations in the game. Also, the quests in Starfield usually take around 20 minutes to half an hour to complete, which is even more map designing to do, NPCs to script, and during quests there will always be little Easter eggs to find that will give context to the environment around it. It's a common misconception that Starfield is entirely procedurally generated, because while it is true the game uses that to achieve 1,000 planets to explore, Starfield has the most handcrafted content in any Bethesda game ever before. Speaking of previous Bethesda games, did you guys know that Wes Johnson, the actor for Oblivion's guards, returned in Starfield to play the role of Hope Tech CEO Ron Hope? I soiled my pants when I found that out.
Just follow Savlian's orders, and everything will be fine.
I'm on your side.
Hit me once more.
I started with nothing and built everything you see around you.
So yes, the missions and characters are deep and well done, but what about the world? After all, Starfield is an open world game with 1,000 planets to explore. Bethesda made Skyrim, which a lot of people still replay to this day just to find new content that they haven't seen before. So is Starfield a disappointment as an open world game? No. Everywhere you go, there is something to discover. I went into the bar in New Atlantis, one of the first places you go in the game. I went to get a drink to hydrate myself, and after talking to the bartender, I heard that she needed help getting her belongings back that was locked away at the ship log. I mean, seriously, I wasn't even trying to get an objective. I just wanted to get liquored. But even when I'm enjoying the side, unimportant daily life in Starfield, there is still something interesting to encounter. In space, you may get stopped by somebody asking for directions or help fending off bandits. I love that Starfield's main story is 19 quests long, so technically you don't even need to sink millions of hours into the game, but you can if you want. You can go off track, and there is so many reasons to do so. It's like the game screams at you not to focus on one thing at a time, because it just begs you to keep exploring. The best part of exploring somewhere though is if it feels like you're adventuring through something that has purpose, and pretty much every location in Starfield has lore to why it's there. There are terminals everywhere that you don't even need to read, and you probably won't, but you can if you just want to absorb that extra bit of lore available to you. There are factions that own different areas of space, and in those areas you get to discover all the different political perspectives on each faction and how one group thinks of another group, and it's just so realistic. The Imperial and Stormcloak feud in Skyrim was great because it allowed the player to choose what political party they wanted to control Skyrim. However, Starfield is so much conflict from so many different angles, it just makes you feel like a little dude in this universe of opinions, which is how you should feel. The detail on everything is jaw-dropping. It also sets my computer on fire. If you go into any interior and walk around, it gives off the illusion that it's actually lived in. The little cleaning robots are adorable, the posters on the walls are funny, and just immersing myself in this world puts a smile on my face ear to ear. I think deep down, I've always wanted a space fantasy adventure. Fantasy. The faculty or activity of imagining things, especially things that are impossible or improbable. That is what Starfield is, a fantasy RPG. Starfield is shamelessly cartoon-like in the execution of its game world. The guns in Starfield are mostly fictional, with the exception of the old Earth ones. Laser guns are common, and your player early on unlocks the ability to use special powers granted to them by the universe. Every religion in Starfield is completely fictional. The lockpicking minigame in Starfield is super fun, and I love the way it picks my brain every time I need to do a difficult lock. It's a great game mechanic too, because as the player lockpicks more, they actually get better at the minigame, so it doesn't just rely on leveling to add challenge like a lot of RPGs would do it. The in-game equivalent to the drugs we have in the real world is chasm bass, which produce psychedelic oils that is used for Aurora, which is a drug that slows down time for whoever uses it. Basically what I'm trying to say is that through and through, Starfield is a work of pure fiction. Oh, and the strip clubs, well, they look like this. So, a lot of people weren't too happy about this. Starfield clearly separates itself from real-world conflict and beliefs. But does this mean Bethesda has gone woke and doesn't put real-world content into their game because they're just too scared to do it? Not necessarily, they just don't have to do it. Pornography and strip clubs are all part of a very dark and sexist rabbit hole in the real world. People are frequently abused in the industry, and it supports the objectification of people in society, especially women. I can definitely understand why in a space fantasy video game about adventure and wonder, they would want to keep out an industry that can be so grim and disturbing. I've seen Starfield compared to games like Cyberpunk that's set in a city full of disturbing underground crime. However, Cyberpunk is more of a warning than anything. Nobody wants to live in Night City, it's depressing, and if you're not filthy rich or CEO of a world-dominating corporation, you're fighting to survive just to get a bag of milk from the store. Rockstar isn't shy with including real-world issues in GTA because Grand Theft Auto is a commentary on our society. GTA is everything that our world is, but just more blunt and simplified. It's interesting playing a game like GTA than going outside and thinking about how the mayhem in Los Santos is exactly like the kind of stuff that we see in our everyday life. But Starfield is an escape from all that. Starfield is a space fantasy adventure that anybody can go into and leave feeling like they didn't just walk away with a new political perspective. It's completely neutral towards every group possible. It doesn't need to say a message. It just needs to be a fun, alternate universe escape from the chaotic world of planet Earth. Speaking of fantasy though, let me run that back to when I was talking about aliens and how people didn't like that Starfield was just inhabited by humans and robots. That's not actually true. Planets in Starfield have different life growing on them, different plants, animals, and elements. These creatures that live on these planets are aliens, they just aren't the UFO flying ones that we want them to be. If we're thinking logically here, well, it's hard to say logically when we pretty much know nothing about space. But Earth in the whole universe of planets that we haven't even discovered yet most definitely isn't the only place with life on it. If we traveled a few galaxies over, we possibly could find something like this, an animal that doesn't speak English but is native to its environment. Although I personally wouldn't mind having more life forms that could interact with the player on equal grounds, I think the decision to not have aliens and UFOs but instead just different creatures for different planets was a beneficial decision for what Starfield is. Okay, so you have this massive world, this sandbox where you can play it any way that you want, but how good is the character creation itself? Character creation in Starfield is really good. You can choose traits that give you special dialogue options throughout the game, and you can customize almost anything you want on your character's face. I hate when games force me to use one type of body, so I appreciate that Starfield has this weight and muscle system for designing your character. Aside from your character though, you can make your spaceship as well, and I've seen some really creative ways the players have done it. You can design the interior, which is just a blessing. I mean, it was a given that this would be a mechanic because flying around in space is a big fat part of the game, but Bethesda executed it really well, and I just want to give a big props to Todd Howard for the way that his team handled a project so massive in scale. Starfield was an enormous project for a team of around 500 developers to work on, but they did, and in my opinion, they succeeded in making a masterpiece. I really think that more people should try out Starfield because I didn't have a lot of expectations going in, but it absolutely exploded my head with the amount of content and detail in the game. If you have played Starfield, or haven't, what are your thoughts on it? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Make sure to leave your answer in the comments below, and I'll make sure to check it out as soon as I possibly can. As always, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch this video, guys. You know, I really appreciate it, and make sure to have a good one.